CBC used to put out a quarterly report on every company, every single company. They no longer do. It's silent, it's hidden. And the corruption of this organization and the 9 Liberal directors in abusing taxpayer money in this way is beyond anything I've ever seen, and I know many members of this House have ever seen. And Mr. Speaker, I understand I will continue with enlightening the House after question period.
The honourable member will have 8 minutes remaining when we do return to debate on the issue. Statements by members. Déclaration de député. The honourable member for Spadina, Fort York.
Mr. Speaker, Canada and the world will soon observe the first anniversary of the October 7th massacre carried out by Hamas terrorists against innocent Israeli citizens. For almost a year, the Liberal government has turned a blind eye to numerous pro-Hamas rallies that incite violence and hatred. Jewish-owned Canadian businesses have been vandalized, schools and synagogues shot at, and people assaulted. Even my wife was stalked, and our home targeted with posters falsely claiming that I support genocide. Mr. Speaker, I support the rule of law. However, hate promoters like Samadun, an entity outlawed in Germany, with the leader banned from the EU, are free to have a rally in Vancouver to celebrate a terrorist act. Other rallies will also be held to support Hamas. Thanks to U.S. intelligence, Canada thwarted one terrorist attack being planned on Canadian soil by a foreign national to mark the anniversary. Does someone have to be killed before the Liberal government acts to keep Canadians safe in the lead up to October 7th and beyond? Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The honourable member for Ottawa Centre.
Speaker, I rise today to honour the memory of Gay Cook, a cherished Ottawa figure in Ottawa who passed away on September 11th at the mighty age of 93. Gay was more than a food journalist. She was the heart of Ottawa's culinary community. Gay, together with her sisters Jean Piggott and Greet Hale, formed the legendary Morrison Sisters. Gay's influence as a food professional, mentor, and friend was far-reaching. Known for her enthusiasm and smile, she was a constant source of kind encouragement to those who shared her love of food world. She always reminded me of the importance of eating a healthy breakfast. As I speak, Gay's family sits in the gallery, and I extend my deepest sympathies to them. Your mother and grandmother's generosity of spirit will continue to inspire us all. Know that her impact was profound. She will be deeply missed, but never forgotten. Thank you, Speaker.
The
honourable member from Montmagny, Lilley, Kamouraska, Rivière-du-Loup. Mr. Speaker, Canadians know that enough is enough. 9 years of this Liberal government is enough. Canadians are fed up with this centralizing, inflationary government that does not respect provincial jurisdiction or taxpayers' money. We will be bringing forward a non-confidence motion in this devastating government that has doubled the debt, the cost of housing, and caused the worst inflation crisis in 40 years, forcing Canadians to go to food banks while living in crime-ridden communities. The Premier of Quebec has been clear. He is asking the Bloc Québécois to stop propping up these liberal follies. The Bloc Québécois is the worst negotiator in history. It has betrayed Quebecers and sold its soul to the Liberals and not received any improvement for Quebec, not even getting the decree cancelled that will put an end to 1,400 forestry jobs in Quebec. The only thing that I'm seeing in this House is a Liberal bloc, not a Bloc Québécois.
Windsor-Tecumseh.
Mr. Speaker, thousands of Lebanese Canadians call my community of Windsor-Essex home. It is a proud, peaceful, and vibrant community, one of the largest in Canada. That community has been shaken by missile attacks and explosions carried out by Israel's government. Attacks that have killed hundreds, injured thousands, and forced countless Lebanese to flee their homes. How much more suffering must the people of Lebanon endure? Mr. Speaker, my community fears an escalation of this terrible conflict, and they are heart-wrenched about the safety of their families. This week I met with the Deputy Prime Minister, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, and the Canada-Lebanon Parliamentary Association. Canada must continue to press Israel and Hezbollah for an immediate ceasefire and demand that innocent civilians be protected. And demand that both parties end this suffering and end this war.
Now, I saw online the honourable member for Churchill-Kiewata-Newcasky.
Today, we honor the memory of Johnson Redhead, the little 6-year-old boy from Shamattawa First Nation who went missing and after days of searching was tragically found deceased. Johnson was loved by his family and community. Many rallied from communities across our region to look for him. We all mourn his shocking death. As has been said, Johnson's tragic death didn't just happen. His family and advocates are calling for an inquiry. We must be clear on how Canada, in particular, failed Johnson Redhead. A lack of coordinated care and safety protocols to help children with complex needs on First Nations, the chronic underfunding of education and health, the persistent third world living conditions in a community like Shamattawa with an acute housing crisis and acute poverty. Shamattawa, the same First Nation that will be at the Supreme Court next month fighting Canada for its right to clean drinking water. As we approach the National Day of Truth and Reconciliation, as we wear our orange shirts and state that every child matters, we honor the memory of Indigenous children forced into residential schools, survivors and their descendants like Johnson Redhead, whose lives matter. And we call on Canada to act now for justice.
The honourable member for Glengarry, Prescott-Russell.
Monsieur le Président, je tiens à féliciter le groupe.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to congratulate Groupe Convex, which is celebrating its 20th anniversary. Groupe Convex is a social enterprise which brings together various services. It offers various recycling and sorting services and hires vulnerable members of society, as well as skills training for people with disabilities. I'd like to thank founding members like Raymond Lemay, Normand Charette, and Caroline Arcan. They have invested hours and hours to ensure that Groupe Convex exists, and they have had the vision to help vulnerable communities and fill a gap in our communities. I'd also like to thank Éric Drouin, his team, and all of the people working for Groupe Convex. And I hope that the organization will continue doing its work for a long time. The honourable member for Bellechasse-les-Chemins-Lévis. I am very pleased to congratulate Noémie O'Farrell, who won a Gémeaux Award for playing Danielle Sullivan in the Social series. She received solid training at the conservatories of Quebec City and Montreal, and she has incredible potential and talent. She is playing now in the theater, on the big screen, the small screen. We have so much pride in Noémie's career. She grew up in Saint Clair, and all of Quebec is proud of her. She has received many awards before, and now she's receiving this prestigious award to recognize her incredible performance. Noémie, we are very proud of you. I am certain that your accomplishments will inspire other young artists to follow their dreams, and that they will realize that you can make a good living from your art.
La députée de Vimy.
Mr. Speaker, today is World Tourism Day. People from around the world visit Canada every day. Through tourism, we share our culture, our natural heritage with others. Le tourisme nous rassemble et crée des...
Tourism brings us together and creates jobs throughout our communities. That is why our government is investing in tourism in all parts of Quebec and Canada. In August, with the Minister of Tourism, I announced $520,000 for Tourism Laval in order to promote tourist development.
Strengthen Laval's position in international markets while stimulating the region's economic ecosystem. Only in 2022, 1.4 million tourists visited Laval, whether it be the Cosmodome, la Musée de la Santé Armand Frappier, le Centre de la Nature, Illumi, and much more. Our government is investing in its tourism businesses, its people, and takes pride in sharing with visitors what we offer to the world.
The honourable member for Hamilton Mountain.
Speaker, as Gender Equality Week wraps up, I want to highlight why we have so much to be proud of here in Canada. Our feminist government has maintained gender parity in cabinet, passed a Pay Equity Act, and created a department dedicated to women and gender equality. We are boosting women's economic power with programs like the National Child Care Plan, the Menstrual Equity Fund, and the Women's Entrepreneurship Fund. All of the above opposed by the Conservatives. Recently, as Parliamentary Secretary, I participated in the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women, and I was often moved to tears by people who approached to tell me how much they respected and admired what we have in Canada, how they want similar woman-friendly programs in their countries, like our commitment to Gender-Based Analysis Plus in all government legislation and initiatives, and our 10-year action plan to fight gender-based violence. When women have access to equal pay and support system, our whole society benefits, Speaker. Thank you.
The honourable member for Edmonton Manning.
Mr. Speaker, last session, the Prime Minister made two comments politicizing the just concerns parents have for their children. He outright told them that they were spreading angry, hateful rhetoric for simply voicing that they want to know what happens in their children's lives. Comments like this are divisive and unacceptable. Conservatives believe the thousands of Canadians that affirm that parents know what's best for their children. Petition E4753 calls on the Prime Minister to stop meddling in these provincial issues and to apologize for insulting Canadian parents. When will the Liberals start with Canadian families, standing with them, and demand an apology from the Prime Minister? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Niagara Centre.
Mr. Speaker, millions of Canadians use our railways every year. Railways make the transportation of essential goods possible. They are the backbone of our supply chains, the backbone of our economy. But tragically, every year, far too many Canadians are seriously hurt or killed on railway tracks. This week, Mr. Speaker, is Railway Safety Week here in Canada, an initiative led by Operation Lifesaver. Our government is dedicated to ensuring the highest levels of safety and security on our railways to prevent tragedies. That's why, through our Railway Safety Improvement Program, we've invested in making over 1,000 rail crossings across Canada much safer. This is a moment, Mr. Speaker, a moment to remind everyone to remain careful near our railway tracks across this great nation. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for St. Albert, Edmonton.
Mr. Speaker, after 9 years, this NDP Liberal government isn't worth the cost or the corruption. At a time when Canadians are facing a cost of living crisis with surging rent and mortgage payments, the Prime Minister awarded his bought and paid for media ally, Tom Clark, with a $9 million luxury condo courtesy of a taxpayer on Billionaires Row in New York City. By no coincidence, the purchase of the condo occurred immediately after the Prime Minister visited Clark in New York. Following the visit, the Liberal government purchased the condo using new special powers granted by the Prime Minister with absolutely no oversight. There is no justification whatsoever for this outrageous purchase. It is a total abuse of the public purse and emblematic of the culture of cronyism and entitlement that is a defining feature of this corrupt Liberal government.
Well said, Mike.
The honourable member for Calgary Heritage.
An unforgiving carbon tax on food, gas, and home heating. 1 in 4 skipping meals. 2 million lined up at food banks. Last year, the Calgary Food Bank saw demand surge by nearly 35%, a record level. Families are crying for help, and where's the NDP? Well, in the worst sellout of all time, he ripped up his coalition papers only to tape them back together. He keeps the Prime Minister in power in order to protect his pension. Canadians have no confidence in this Prime Minister or his carbon tax. To this sellout NDP leader, Tuesday is coming. What will it be? Prop up this Prime Minister again and hike the tax by 61 cents a litre, or call the carbon tax election Canadians need today? After 9 years of NDP Liberals, taxes are up, costs are up, crime's up, and time is up.
The honourable member for Sydney, Victoria.
Mr. Speaker, as the National Day of Truth and Reconciliation approaches, may we all reflect on the 94 calls to action that call for creating awareness of our shared history, addressing past wrongs, and most importantly, supporting healing for Indigenous people. Advancing reconciliation is a journey that we must all take together as a country. And while more than 85% of the calls to action are in process or complete, half of them need long-term and stable funding that will require a nonpartisan approach over generations. Mr. Speaker, over the past few years, we've seen important legislation passed, including child welfare, UNDRIP, Indigenous language, and most recently, an independent Truth and Reconciliation Committee that ensures that the federal government will be held accountable in the future. I ask all Canadians to take time to listen to the survivors of the Indian Residential School and consider what action they can take to advance reconciliation. Thank you.
The honourable member for Winnipeg Centre.
Mr. Speaker, September 30th is the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, Orange Shirt Day. This is a day to reflect on the genocide that was committed through the residential school system and the ongoing impacts it has on survivors, family members, and communities. For more than 150 years, over 150,000 children were kidnapped from their families and communities and placed in residential schools. Many never made it home. But despite irrefutable evidence supporting this history, many people, including some parliamentarians, continue to deny or downplay the impacts of this genocidal system. That is why this week I tabled Bill C-413 to end residential school denialism and protect the stories of survivors. This Orange Shirt Day, I send my love and support to all survivors of residential school, their families and their communities. May you be wrapped in the love and tenderness on this very important day.
The Honourable Member for Manicouagan. On behalf of the Bloc Québécois, today I rise to speak to the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. Truth, because we need to create strong bonds between human beings, between nations, between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people, but that is impossible if we do not cast light on every aspect of history so that we put an end to secrecy and the pain caused by lies. And we need to bring people together because while reconciliation is a principle here, we also need to go even further than that because reconciliation means bringing union back where it used to exist but was then broken. So we need to re-solidify these bonds. We need to turn towards each other. We need to get to know each other's deepest souls and become one once again, as though we shared the same blood flowing in our veins. And thus, using this light cast on the tragedies of the past, we will turn towards a better future. Thank you. Let us always remember.
The honourable member for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, Rideau Lakes.
CTV News aired a segment that deliberately misrepresented comments made by the leader of the official opposition on the eve of a confidence vote. CTV edited together out-of-sequence phrases to create a lie to protect their massive government subsidies and to protect a failing prime minister. CTV manufactured a false narrative about the common-sense conservative confidence vote. They desperately tried to avoid reporting the vote was about the urgent need for a carbon tax election. Canadians deserve fairness and accuracy and accountability in news, but CTV showed a complete disregard for basic journalistic integrity and ethics. This was not an accident or a misunderstanding. This is another example of the media's shameful anti-conservative bias. Just look at the excuses made by the heavily subsidized PMO stenographers at the Toronto Star. So take a note. Deliberate misinformation and lies will be called out and condemned. After 9 years of these NDP Liberals, taxes are up, costs are up, crime is up, and time is up for the bought and paid for media bias.
The honourable member for Winnipeg North.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, unlike the Conservatives, we recognize that mainstream media is a fundamental pillar to Canada's democracy, Mr. Speaker. We have the leader of the Conservative Party and his puppets talking down mainstream media. Mr. Speaker, this is of a great danger, and Canadians do deserve a more accountable official opposition. They now say that they're going to boycott CTV. They discredit CBC all the time. Two national TV networks, Mr. Speaker, all all in favor of being able to spread their misinformation through social media. I say shame on them, Mr. Speaker, for not representing Canadians through our national media outlets. What have you got to hide? The Conservative agenda, that's what it's all about, Mr. Speaker. Misinformation, and it's to the detriment of all Canadians.
Well, before we move on, I just wanted to that there are a number of things. Puppets is one of those issues that we tend not to use. Earlier we used sellout, so there's a number of false titles that we've been using. So I want to make sure that everybody stays away from those false titles today during question period. Oral questions. Question orale, the honourable member for Calgary Forest Lawn.
The Civil NDP government, taxes up, costs up, crimes up, time's up. This Prime Minister wasn't afraid his carbon tax scam made Canadians poorer. He's not even afraid this carbon tax scam does nothing for the environment. He's not afraid that this carbon tax scam will blow a $34 billion hole in our GDP. If this Prime Minister is so sure about his carbon tax scam, why is he so afraid of a carbon tax election now?
Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, the ridiculous comments continue. As I have said many, many times, 8 out of 10 Canadian families get more money back. It works directly inverse to income, so that those that actually are most vulnerable get much more money back than they actually pay. That is something that's been validated by 300 economists in this country. I have invited the Leader of the Opposition to talk to those economists. He has steadfastly refused because what he is doing is simply making up facts. He has no plan to address the climate crisis. He has no plan for the future of the economy in Canada. It is an enormous shame that the official opposition can't do better than that.
The honourable member for Calgary Forest Lawn.
The minister has selective reading. If he read the PBO's report and flipped a few pages over, he would see that a majority of Canadians pay more into this tax than what they get back. And here's another fact for him. They have a push people into poverty plan because 2 million Canadians are going to a food bank in a single month, 1 million more projected to this year, a third of which are children. And for the first time, 1 in 4 Canadians are skipping meals in this country. How is the Prime Minister okay starving kids with his carbon tax scam, but too scared to call a carbon tax election now?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Once again, the honourable member is using false facts, and I would be more than happy to sit with him to actually walk him through the PBO report and the report of the 300 economists. But beyond the fact that—
Order. I can't hear any of that exchange. So I want to keep the noise to a minimum. Today would be great. The Honourable Minister can start from the top.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yet again, there are false facts being put forward. I would be very happy to sit with the honourable member and walk him through the PBO report, walk him through the 300 economist report that actually shows that 8 out of 10 Canadian families get more money back. But I would say beyond the misleading statements in this House, the hypocrisy is amazing. Every member on that side of the House ran in an election to put a price on pollution. Many of them, including the Leader of the Opposition, ran in 2008 under Stephen Harper, putting a price on pollution. The member for Pitt Meadows worked in the BC government when they put a price on pollution. The hypocrisy.
The honourable member for Calgary Forest Lawn.
That minister is more interested in sitting with politicians than sitting with Canadians who will tell them that his carbon tax scam is sending them to the food banks. Their own department shows that 25% of Canadians are going to go into a food bank, and their radical plan is to quadruple the carbon tax scam. Can you imagine what the food bank lines are going to be when that happens? Before the Prime Minister starves even more Canadians and quadruples his carbon tax scam, why doesn't he show some balls, call a carbon tax election, and let—
I'm going to ask the honourable member to retract that last comment. Retract it. Thank you.
I retract the last comment.
Is anyone going to— the Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is a disservice to Canadians to say things in this House that are simply not true, and that's what the honourable member is doing each and every day. 8 out of 10 Canadians get more money back. It is the most vulnerable in our society that actually are much better off because of the price on pollution while fighting climate change. It is the most vulnerable that he is targeting. He is looking to make poor people in this country poorer. Shame on the Conservative Party of Canada.
The honourable member for Bellechasse-les-Chemin-Lévis. Everything is backwards. The Bloc is saving the Liberal Party after calling it every name in the book. And then they're supporting this government's spending and for more public servants and for killing forestry jobs. The Bloc Liberal coalition needs to vote for our non-confidence motion. We want the House to be dissolved. The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, we've already seen this. It's déjà vu. We've already had this conversation, and this time I would solemnly ask the member to be clear with respect to the hidden agenda of the Conservative Party to lay off tens of thousands of public servants in my community, in hers, and across Canada. I would like her to be very clear and specific with the number of cuts that they expect to make. The honourable member for Bellechasse-les-Chemin-Lévis. The Bloc Liberal coalition has the same comment, the same track sheet. Doubling of the debt, 50% of young people living from paycheck to paycheck, and roughly 3/4 think that the previous generations had better chance for financial success than they did. 2 million Canadians are going to food banks. This is the Bloc Liberal track sheet. Can the Bloc allow Canadians to trigger an election and decide right now? The Honourable Minister. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The member knows full well that triggering an election would be possibly denying a government who only is focused on insults, mistrust, and austerity. They just want to talk about the price on carbon. It's not surprising why 8 out of 10 Canadian families receive more, because the richer pay more and poorer people pay less. And incomes are just redistributed to all these families so that middle-class families and poor pay less than what they receive. The honourable member for Manicouagan. The Bloc Québécois has given an ultimatum on behalf of seniors. October 29th is the deadline to stop depriving seniors aged 64 to 74 years of age. We need to help all seniors and stop age-based discrimination. It'll be the end to these two classes of seniors. It may also be the end to the Liberal government. Will the government finally correct this injustice and enhance OAS for all seniors? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, in the Manicouagan riding, a very lovely riding, there are over 7,800 seniors that are eligible for the federal dental care program, and that member voted against it. It's very consistent also because she also voted against the increase in the GIS and the lowering of the retirement age to 65. But now she's being less consistent. But I need to know why she votes systematically against seniors. The honourable member from Manicouagan. The Liberals should know that for retirees, pensions aren't a joke. Being partisanship with OAS is also being partisan with the cost of living and the quality of life of our seniors. The Liberals are wrong if they think they're going to push seniors aside with seniors in the House. They need to adjust pension levels. It's a serious question, and so should the answer be. Will the government increase OAS for those aged 65 to 74? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, it doesn't end here. In fact, all that this government was able to do to decrease poverty in our seniors, we did so with opposition from who? The Bloc. they systematically opposed any assistance offered to our seniors and often the most vulnerable seniors in Canada. I'll give you another example. 50,000 housing units for seniors involving $1.5 million for the Rent Protection Fund. Well, the Bloc voted against that, Mr. Speaker.
Indigenous peoples across Canada are still dying at the hands of the police and RCMP. Just this week, a First Nations man from Saskatchewan was killed. And instead of acting, this government wants another study on policing. Studies won't save lives. We need action now, like an Indigenous-led crisis response team. The Liberals need to stop delaying. Why does this government refuse to act to save Indigenous people's lives?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the honourable member for raising this issue. Obviously, any death by police is tragic, and the systemic racism that Indigenous peoples face in the criminal justice system is also a tragedy. This is something we know. We are putting together, and we have worked on a number of measures. There is definitely more to do. I appreciate the suggestion that the member has made, and we will continue to work on this to ensure that everybody is safe. Thank you.
The honourable member for Winnipeg Centre.
Speaker, with the rise of residential school denialism, survivors and their families and communities need protection, especially when there's members of Parliament, including the leader of the Conservative Party, who fundraise with residential school denying think tanks like Frontier Centre. Mr. Speaker, willfully promoting hatred against Indigenous people through residential school denialism has no place in Canada. So will the Liberal government support my bill to end this hate and protect the stories of survivors?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary and Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the member opposite for her question. And when I think about my family members who attended the Indian residential school in Shubenacadie, knowing full well that 1 in 25 children who went to residential schools didn't come home, it's shameful that anyone would deny that the residential schools happen and its impact on Canadians. Our government is going to continue to create awareness. Our government is going to continue to support healing. Our government is going to continue to address past wrongs. We're committed to that.
The honourable member for Central Okanagan, Similkameen Nicola.
Mr. Speaker, after 9 years of this NDP Liberal government, we know that taxes are up, costs are up, crime is up, and time is up. David Eby has flip-flopped on the carbon tax in time for his provincial election. This means both parties contending for government want to axe the tax before winter. Like it has with so many provinces, this NDP Liberal government will simply impose a federal carbon tax on British Columbia. The NDP should end their costly coalition with the Prime Minister and vote non-confidence on Tuesday. If he's so confident about a 61 cent a litre tax, why won't the Prime Minister call a carbon tax election?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I have said a number of times, 8 out of 10 Canadian families get more money back than they pay. It works directly inverse to income. I would be more than happy to sit with my friend across the way to walk him through the 300 economists that actually validate that assertion. With respect to Premier Eby, I agree with his concern around affordability. He actually took a bunch of the revenue and used it in general revenue. That is not something the federal government does. We return the money to Canadians. 8 out of 10 get more money back. It is an affordability measure and an efficient way to fight climate change.
The Honourable Member of Central Okanagan, Similkameen Nicola.
I like that the minister dumped on David Eby, but they just don't get it, Mr. Speaker. How much more expensive everything in British Columbia has become under David Eby and this NDP Liberal government. Right. Food is up 29%, transportation up 23%, natural gas up 49%, gasoline up 45%, rented homes up 23%, owned homes up 29%. British Columbians need a change. If it's truly the people's time, as the federal NDP leader likes to say, the NDP must end their costly coalition with the Prime Minister so we can have a carbon tax election. Why are they so afraid, Mr. Speaker, of a carbon tax election?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Well, I find it very interesting, Mr. Speaker, that the Conservative Party of Canada is campaigning on behalf of Mr. Rustad and the Conservative Party of BC. I guess they share his views on anti-vaxxation, his denial of climate change, and a range of other things, including very ludicrous stories about coming from the internet about eating bugs. So this is something that maybe perhaps has infected our friends across the way.
The honourable member for Yorkton Melville.
This NDP Liberal coalition has failed Saskatchewan. Scott Moe is right. Besides the heavy cost of the carbon tax on consumers, the NDP Liberal carbon tax is costing Saskatchewan's health and education systems $380 million by 2030. That's money that could be used to get more teachers, doctors, and nurses in our province. The NDP is delusional if they don't end their costly coalition on Tuesday. This Prime Minister knows his carbon tax plan is a failure and Canadians want him gone. Is that why he's so afraid to call a carbon tax election?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
As I say, Mr. Speaker, this is an affordability mechanism where 8 out of 10 families get more money back, and it's the poorest, the most vulnerable who actually get the most back. But I would actually encourage the member across the way to go and have a conversation with her Premier, Scott Moe, who actually said when he looked at the price on pollution and all the alternatives, all of the other alternatives are too expensive. And so Scott Moe's solution, which I guess is the Conservative Party's solution, is essentially to do nothing to fight climate change.
The honourable member for Yorkton Melville.
After 9 years of NDP Liberals, taxes are up, costs are up, crime is up, and time is up. I'm proud of our Premier Scott Moe and standing up to the NDP and Liberals as they attack Saskatchewan, stripping $6 billion out of our economy over the next 6 years, reducing our GDP by 1.5%. I agree with Moe. This NDP Liberal coalition must go. This Prime Minister knows his carbon tax plan is a complete failure. Is that why he's so afraid to call a carbon tax election?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Speaker. I want to take the opportunity here to point out that tomorrow is Safe Access to Abortion Day and to reaffirm that on this side of the House, we always stand up for a woman's right to choose. We're investing in reproductive health across this country. Unlike the Conservatives, who are, to this day, still greenlighting candidates who want to make abortion illegal in this country.
The honourable member for Kildonan St. Paul.
After 9 years of these NDP Liberals, taxes are up, costs are up, crime's up, and time's up, Mr. Speaker. After 9 years, violent crime is up 50% in this country, and sexual assaults are up 75% in Canada. A serial rapist in Edmonton was released on April, only 4 years after he sexually assaulted 5 women. Earlier this year, a child sex abuser was allowed out on bail. A warrant was issued for his arrest, and at that time, he allegedly sexually abused another child, Mr. Speaker. Bail and parole in this country are ruined under the Liberals and their NDP supporters. When will the Prime Minister call a carbon tax election and finally put the rights of victims first, Mr. Speaker?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, gender-based violence has always been a problem. Many women in this House know this viscerally. When the Conservatives were in power, many sexual assaults were considered unfounded. They weren't even counted, and that has changed, Mr. Speaker. We listen to women now, and on this side of the House, for the first time ever, we have a government finally doing something about it. We've got a national action plan, $500 million rolling out across the country. The Conservatives oppose these measures. Their hidden agenda is not so hidden.
The member for Kildonan St. Paul.
Mr. Speaker, that member voted for Bill C-5, which allowed house arrest for sexual assault, Mr. Speaker. They also supported Bill C-75, which made it easier for repeat violent offenders, including rapists, to get bail. That's their record that the NDP supported every step of the way. When will they call a carbon tax election so we can finally stop the crime in this country, Mr. Speaker?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, Minister of Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, it's incredibly disturbing to see the member opposite talk about violence against women and then bring in their slogan of carbon tax election. It just shows how disingenuous Conservatives are when it comes to violence against women. And if they truly care about protecting women, then they should support our position on moving forward to get guns that were designed for the battlefield off our streets. As we know, women are disproportionately affected by gun violence, and it's a shame that Conservatives serve the gun lobby ahead of women.
The honourable member for Montcalm. October 29th is an ultimatum for supply management. Yesterday, Senators once again took our Bill C-282 off the agenda, which protects farmers. The Senate has been paralyzing this all-party bill for a year now. The Liberals should ask themselves if they want to put their electoral fate in the hands of some unelected senators? Are they going to call the Senate and make it understand that if CC 282 doesn't pass, we're going to an election? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I also have made calls, and I would encourage my colleague to do the same. We are a government that always defends supply management, and we know that Conservatives in the past failed in the face of American negotiators, and we have stood up for farmers, and we're always going to stand up to defend supply management. Honourable Member for Montcalm. All parties should denounce the fact that senators think they're elected representatives and are thus paralyzing the will of the House to protect farmers. But the Liberals have one more reason, because their electoral fate depends on it. And it's unelected senators that have given themselves the right to decide for them. So we're extending the invitation to the Liberals and sharing it with the other parties. Will they put pressure on the Senate to respect democracy and finally adopt Bill C-282? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would also encourage my colleague once again to not try to convince people here, because we're already convinced. They need to make calls to the other House. Our government has always defended supply management and will always do so. We gave $5 billion, in fact, to protect our dairy producers and poultry producers. We have supported them, and our government has always defended supply management and will always do so. And I would encourage the bloc member to call the other place.
Mr. Speaker, after 9 years of these NDP Liberals, taxes are up, costs are up, crime is up, and time is up. According to Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe, the carbon tax will cost the province's education system $204 million and the healthcare system $175 million.
Unbelievable.
That's because schools and hospitals need heat and electricity during the cold Saskatchewan winter. When will the NDP Liberals break up their costly coalition and call a carbon tax election?
Great question.
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources and Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just like the Conservative Party of Canada, Premier Moe in Saskatchewan has no effective plan to address climate change and no effective plan to build an economy that's going to be strong in the future. We have designed the price on pollution in a manner that addresses affordability concerns and, in fact, helps with affordability concerns with those most vulnerable in our society. We have built the most comprehensive climate plan in the world. We are on track to achieve the emissions reductions. This is progress, Mr. Speaker. At some point, the climate-denying Conservatives on the other side need to get with the program, recognize the reality of climate change, and embed that in environmental and economic policy.
Honourable Member for Regina-Wascana.
Mr. Speaker, Saskatchewan hospitals, schools, and municipalities are struggling to provide services to people because of the NDP Liberal government keeps raising the carbon tax. In fact, the government of Saskatchewan estimates that the carbon tax will take $6 billion out of the province's economy by the end of the decade. That's money that could be used to hire doctors, nurses, and teachers. Mr. Speaker, why doesn't the Prime Minister call a carbon tax election?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
It's sad to see, Mr. Speaker, Conservatives denying the need for climate action, given businesses are hurting right now. Climate damages are leading to economic losses of $25 billion per year and will quadruple by mid-century. That's real incentive to act, and industry and businesses demand it. The Conservatives can no longer deny the economic realities of climate change and hide behind their fanciful, little, empty, self-serving slogans.
Yeah, nicely said.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Confederation.
Mr. Speaker, after 9 painful years of this NDP Liberal government, taxes are up, costs are up, crime is up, time is up, and we're all fed up. While this NDP Liberal government claims the carbon tax impact on Canadians' economy is minimal, the Parliamentary Budget Officer reveals the true cost to the economy will soar into the billions by 2030. It is time the NDP end their costly coalition with the Prime Minister on Tuesday. If the Prime Minister is so convinced his carbon tax is good, why is he so afraid to call a carbon tax election?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources and Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would commend the honourable member on actually getting the various taglines correct, and I'm sure the gold star will actually be on the board in the Conservative Party. But at the end of the day, Mr. Speaker, I would invite folks on the other side of the House to actually look at the facts. 300 economists in this country have validated the fact that 8 out of 10 Canadians get more money back. And we have seen that putting a price on pollution is an effective way to reduce emissions. Carbon emissions are down in this country. We're on track to achieve our climate goals, and we are moving forward to build an economy that will be strong, create economic opportunity for Canadians in every province and territory.
The honourable member for Montmagny-Lisle Kamouraska Rivière-du-Loup. Mr. Speaker, after 9 years of this Liberal government, young Quebecers are suffering. The cost of living is strangling them. They live from paycheck to paycheck, and they can't save. The Bloc can no longer justify keeping the centralizing inflationary Prime Minister in power. It is an injustice to Quebecers and doesn't help young people. The Bloc, can it finally help Quebecers instead of imposing poverty on them rather than propping up this Liberal Prime Minister? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's because we're taking care of Canadians that we've established many measures to help them, to allow them to get through these tougher times. For example, the CCB, it puts an extra $7,000 in the pockets of families, and when the child is aged between 6 and 17 years of age, they're getting more than last year. So we're going to continue to be there to support families. Thank you.
The honourable member for Edmonton Strathcona.
Mr. Speaker, Indigenous people make up 5% of Edmonton's population, and yet between 55 and 65% of unhoused people are Indigenous. Instead of building homes to solve the crisis, the Liberals are delaying action. Not one single home has been built through the urban, rural, and northern Indigenous housing strategy. And as the Liberals delay, we know that the Conservatives would just cut these crucial programs and give the money to luxury developers. Why are the Liberals denying Indigenous peoples a safe place to call home right now?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Indigenous Services.
Mr. Speaker, decades of underinvestment and discrimination means that there is a tremendous lack of safe, affordable housing and housing supports for Indigenous peoples across this country. We've taken action to support Indigenous peoples in urban, rural, and northern communities to build strong, healthy communities. In our efforts to close this gap, we've increased our funding on reserve for housing by 1,300%. We've supported the construction, renovation, and retrofit of over 36,000 homes, with 23,000 completed. We will not stop, Mr. Speaker. We're focused on results. Following the lead of Indigenous partners is creating tangible, lasting Indigenous-led solutions to close this gap.
The honourable member for Skeena, Bulkley Valley.
Mr. Speaker, toxic drugs continue to kill people's loved ones in northern BC at an alarming rate, and First Nations families are disproportionately affected. In Terrace, the rate of death from toxic drugs is the second highest in our province. The Northern First Nations Alliance has been pushing for years for more detox and treatment capacity so people don't have to travel to the Lower Mainland for services. The Alliance has urged this Liberal government to help. Why hasn't the government acted?
The Honourable Minister of Addictions and Mental Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the member for his question. Mr. Speaker, there is no community that has been left untouched by the illegal toxic drug supply. It has been a tragedy for so many communities that are losing their loved ones, and we know that Indigenous communities are disproportionately affected. And we've answered that call of listening to communities, Mr. Speaker, in Budget 2024 with the Emergency Transfer Fund, which will be launched shortly to work directly with community to address the overdose crisis. We know that communities need help. We've been there for them with over $1 billion in investments to date, and we will continue to do the work. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Egmont.
Mr. Speaker, owner-operator rules for Canada's Atlantic fishery are a bedrock institution, as they once were for the West Coast, before the Conservative Party eliminated it in favour of big corporate fishing fleets. These rules protect independent fishers and the livelihoods of fishing families. Can the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Fisheries and Oceans inform this House and fishers on the government's commitment to protecting the owner-operator policy from those in this chamber who would gut this policy?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Fisheries.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank my friend for his question and for his advocacy for protecting owner-operator policies in Atlantic Canada and Quebec. our government remains firmly committed to strengthening Canada's owner-operating rules as part of the mandatory review of the Fisheries Act. But get a load of this, Mr. Speaker. This week, the Conservatives obstructed this review and left us wondering if they have a plan, a secret plan for gutting owner-operator once and for all. So let's be clear, Mr. Speaker. We won't stand for that. We won't let schemes, scams, and hidden plans work. The Conservatives are out of time on this one.
The honourable member for Kelowna Lake Country.
After 9 years of the NDP Liberals, taxes are up, costs are up, crime is up, and time is up. The Federal Housing Agency's latest report proved again the Liberal photo-op housing policy is not building homes. The report shows housing starts are declining in major cities like Vancouver, Toronto, and Ottawa. You see it with more tent encampments and more people sleeping on the streets. On Tuesday, the NDP Liberals must end their costly coalition with the Prime Minister. Will they?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
In fact, Mr. Speaker, she ought to look at the CMHC report that she just referenced a bit more closely. In major Canadian cities, like Montreal, for example, rental construction is up by 106%, in fact, in that community. Right. I'd also point out that the reason for that, Mr. Speaker, is the waiving of GST on the costs for rental construction. That is, as we speak, putting more supply into the market. In order to bring costs down, we need more supply, but they're not in favor of that measure. She talks about encampments. The Conservatives oppose everything this government has done to lower the number of encampments in this country.
Member for Kelowna Lake Country.
Well, last week the NDP voted to declare a housing crisis, and yet the NDP continues to vote confidence in the Liberals. After 9 years, housing costs have doubled. It now takes 30 years to save for the average home. There are thousands of tent encampments. Chronic homelessness increased 38% since 2018, and veterans are living on the streets. There are nowhere near the number of homes being built to bring back housing affordability to Canadians. Next Tuesday, will the NDP Liberals let Canadians decide on a carbon tax election?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Housing.
Mr. Speaker, the member talks about increasing supply of housing. I point out that the Housing Accelerator Fund, which is the signature program of this government to increase supply, incents zoning changes at the local level. Restrictive zoning is the single biggest impediment to getting more supply on the market. What did this government do? We've put forward funding for housing, for infrastructure, and in exchange, communities need to make zoning changes. Almost 200 have done exactly that. That member voted against it, not just in general terms, but for her own community of Kelowna. On top of that, she's voted against homelessness funding for her community in Kelowna. She's not serious.
The honourable member for Louis Saint Laurent. Mr. Speaker, 280 forestry workers, 280 of them, have just learned they're going to lose their jobs just before Christmas. 160 in Mauricie, 120 in the Outaouais area. Our thoughts are with the families who've been dealt this terrible blow. And what's happening here in Ottawa? We have a Liberal government that's being propped up by the Bloc, and they're holding this threat over forestry workers. Mr. Speaker, is there a single minister who can stand up here and say that order is a good idea when the industry is suffering? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Mr. Speaker, our hearts go out to anyone who loses their job. We're very disappointed that the U.S. Has increased their unjustifiable tariffs on Canadian softwood. Those unfair and unjustifiable tariffs will hurt consumers on both sides of the border and will have a negative impact on workers and their communities. Mr. Speaker, we will always stand up for the softwood lumber industry here in Canada and Quebec. The honourable member for Louis Saint Laurent. Well, with answers like that, you see the results. So, Mr. Speaker, I can't get over it. The Bloc has renewed its confidence in the Liberal government this week and probably will again next week. They say they wanted to give them the benefit of the doubt. Well, there's no doubt about what this order is going to do. There are 1,400 people who might lose their job because of the Liberal forestry order. Is there anyone here in this place who will say that it's a good idea to impose that order when the forestry industry is currently suffering in Quebec? The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My colleague says that he's hesitant to support that position because clearly most Quebecers are concerned. They're worried about Conservative cuts. So my colleague will have to explain to the Bloc why the Bloc should align itself with them when they want to undermine women's rights, they want to deny climate change, and they want to turn their backs on the middle class at critical times like around housing. The honourable member for Laurentides-Labelle. There's a lot of political game playing going on about sharing the load of asylum seekers. Everyone's going to have to get their act together. Quebec's capacity to accommodate has been exceeded. Our public services are overwhelmed, and more asylum seekers are living in inhumanely precarious conditions. If we don't share the burden or refuse to take part, we will be responsible for a humanitarian crisis. The federal government promised to do that, and the provinces said they would do their fair share. What are they going to do now to resolve the impasse? The Honourable Minister.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Immigration is a cooperative and collaborative file. And it's clear that the Government of Canada has a role to play, a cooperative role to play. And the good news is things are going well and they're getting better. And in recent days, there was people got ahead of themselves saying that nothing had changed. That's not true. Lots has moved on this file. Lots of details. A letter was sent by the federal government to Mr. Legault, spelling out all the things the federal government had done. The honourable member, while everyone is assigning blame, Quebec is still racking up thousands more asylum seekers every month to an already overcapacity situation. The federal government lacks leadership, and some provinces are lacking in humanity, but Quebec's problems are getting worse. For years now, Quebecers have been taking a disproportionate share of Canada's asylum seekers, while Canada has been shirking its responsibilities. Quebecers are tired of being the only ones doing their share. When will Canada finally do its part? The Honourable Minister of Public Services. Here's an example, Mr. Speaker, of things to fix, things that have been fixed. For example, there's been a 75% drop in applicants, and the number of applicants at the Trudeau Airport has gone down by 70%. The number of asylum applications has gone down by 42% since February, and the share of asylum seekers in Quebec versus the rest of the country has gone from 40% down to 29% since February. That's the type of numbers that everyone should be paying heed to.
This NDP Liberal government has failed Canadians when it comes to wildfire mitigation. In Jasper, a third of the town went up in flames. Thousands are now left homeless and nearing $1 billion in devastation. Even with that result, this radical environment minister had the audacity to call it a success. People in Jasper are demanding answers for how this happened under this minister's authority. Mr. Speaker, was it negligence, incompetence, or both?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations.
Mr. Speaker, we're seeing that Canada is warming 5 times faster than other countries. The damage from extreme weather events in Canada is more than $175 million per year. But our environmental plan reduces emission and puts more money in the hands of 8 out of 10 Canadians. Climate change is real, and the Conservatives don't have a plan, and it's shameful.
The Honourable Member for Yellowhead.
I guess blaming climate change is easier than to admit to incompetence. In 2017, the former MP for Yellowhead gave warnings. For years, the mayor and forestry experts warned that a devastating wildfire in Jasper was inevitable without action. This radical environment minister knew it was coming and still chose to do nothing. Now a third of the town is gone, thousands are homeless, and nearly $1 billion in damage. Mr. Speaker, will the minister personally apologize to the people of Jasper for his failure?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Not only, as my colleague said, does Canada actually have a comprehensive plan to address and mitigate carbon emissions that cause climate change. But we've also invested significantly in climate adaptation to ensure that we are taking the steps to do what we can to prevent significant impacts from the climate change that is already with us. Certainly, Parks Canada has been part of that. They are a leader in the context of managing the parks on a climate adaptation basis, and I think it's just reprehensible that he's throwing the officials from Parks Canada under the bus.
The honourable member for Dauphin, Swan River, Neepawa.
Mr. Speaker, an email obtained from the Environment Minister's Department revealed a senior official was questioning the political optics of forest management practices that prevent wildfires. The email stated, "At what point do we make the organizational decision to cancel planned prescribed burns in Western Canada? Political perception may become more important than actual prescription windows." End quote. Why were the political optics more important than forest management to the minister months before Jasper wildfires?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, what the members opposite are doing is absolutely shameful. As the Minister of Environment explained to this House yesterday, they are taking an email out of context, and now that official is facing death threats. Mr. Speaker, what happened in Jasper is a national tragedy, but it is a result of climate change. If the members opposite want to get to the bottom of this, they should start by recognizing that climate change is real. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Lac Saint Louis. Mr. Speaker, here and around the world, tourism is not only a driver of economic development, it's also a matter of pride. Pride in being able to showcase our beautiful, magnificent country to the world. And it brings together people from other parts of the world, creating bonds of friendship and cooperation. So it's not surprising that tourism contributes $43 billion a year to our GDP and 2 million jobs. Can the Minister of Tourism tell us how our government is encouraging tourism to support the people who work in it? The Honourable Minister of Tourism. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. World Tourism Day is an opportunity. Just a minute.
I just want to say, we were doing really good up to that point. And we're only a few questions to the end of question period, so let's just get to the end of it. Let's just... Shh. I'll resume. You know what? I'm standing up. And when I'm standing up, honourable members are supposed to be listening to the chair.
The Honourable Minister of Tourism. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. World Tourism Day is an opportunity to highlight the pride, inclusiveness, and contribution of tourism to the economy. Last week at the G20 Tourism Summit, I had a chance to talk with various world leaders about the importance of the tourism industry and the challenges it faces. Tourism is threatened by climate change. Contrary to the Conservatives who don't believe in fighting climate change or that climate change even exists, our government not only invests in tourism, but we're also fighting against climate change, which is real, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, after 9 years of NDP Liberals, taxes are up, costs are up, crime's up, time's up, and now carbon tax Carney is waiting in the wings, advising the Liberal leader and getting richer with every new Liberal policy announcement, like the Liberals' recent increase on mortgage insurance limits. Higher limits won't build houses, but they will increase profits for mortgage insurance companies like Sagen, whose parent company's board is chaired by Mark Carney. When will the government force Carney to disclose his conflicts of interest?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Housing.
Here they go on personal attacks, Mr. Speaker. You know what they say about those who engage in personal attacks? They have no meaningful ideas to offer. They should talk to the insurance sector. They should talk to the mortgage sector. They should talk to the home building sector about the challenges facing the country and what this government has done. The recent changes that he puts forward, that he raises today on mortgages are meaningful. They will add to supply. We have measures to increase supply more generally. We have encampments that we are working to lower in this country, municipalities and not-for-profits. We will continue the work. They will continue to say nothing.
The Honourable Member for Lanark, Frontenac, Kingston.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, when Canadians have problems with their online MyCRA accounts, they have no choice but to contact the ministry by telephone. And here's what typically happens. When they call the CRA's toll-free number, more often than not, they are greeted by a recorded message telling them the line is full and to try again later. When they do get through, They are frequently put on hold for as much as 4 hours, which can then end when the phone line simply goes dead. Several entire days can be consumed in this stressful exercise. Now, Mr. Speaker, this problem was identified by the Auditor General in 2018. But if anything, it seems to be getting worse. Why is it not being fixed after 6 years?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Women.
Thank you, Speaker. I just want to recognize the hard work that CRA employees do every day in and out, and we will get back to the member on the specifics of his question.
Honourable Member for Lanark, Frontenac, Kingston.
Well, Mr. Speaker, that's why I filled out a late show form in advance. Mr. Speaker, to provide advice on how best to reopen the prison farm at Joyceville near Kingston, Correctional Services of Canada appointed a prison farm advisory panel. The panel's advice was to add a cow dairy program. One result of this advice has been the purchase of cattle from members of the very same advisory panel. Another result has been the construction of a $16 million taxpayer-funded barn to house them. This is such an obvious conflict of interest that the minister owes us an explanation. Why did he allow the purchase of cows from members of the advisory panel?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Safety.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's not a surprise from the member opposite that he does not believe in the training programs for inmates that we know reduce recidivism. Mr. Speaker, it's pretty clear that not everybody comes from a position of privilege and has been able to access education and training. But we know when it comes to keeping communities safe that it is providing education and training for inmates that will keep our communities safe into the future.
Just going to wait a second. I'm just going to wait a second. I'm just going to wait a second for the side conversations to end before going to the Honourable Member for Newmarket Aurora.
Mr. Speaker, earlier this week, the leader of the Conservative Party called out our pharmacare plan as radical. And he's continued to downplay the significance and the impact of the Canadian Dental Care Plan so far. It has already helped over 750,000 Canadians, and it is projected to help 9 million people by the end of 2025. Can the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Health please explain why it is so important to maintain public health care?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Speaker. The only thing radical about opposition leaders' ideas is his plans to cut Canadians' pensions and health care. He has shown again and again his true colors. He won't stand up for protecting universal health care for all Canadians. What does the Conservative leader mean when he says radical pharmacare? It means he does not want to see universal health care protected in our country. It means that he would stop 9 million women from gaining access to free contraceptives. He would take away dental care from uninsured Canadians, and he would cut coverage for 3.5 million people living with diabetes. We will not let him do that.
Member for Windsor West.
Mr. Speaker, as we witness the tragic escalation of violence in Israel, Gaza, and now Lebanon, Canada has abandoned decades of world leadership to sitting on the sidelines. Now with thousands of airstrikes on Lebanese civilians, hundreds killed, including 2 Canadians, and thousands wounded, what will it take for Canada to find the courage to stand up to Netanyahu? Parliament has called for a ceasefire, to stop sending arms to the region, and to help all those displaced with assistance. When will the Liberals take action to save lives instead of spewing empty words?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I want to thank the member for his question. And he gives us an opportunity to recognize 2 Canadians who were innocent, who were killed, trying to flee from violence in Lebanon. I particularly name Hussein and Dad Tabaja. It's a tragedy which is ongoing in the whole Middle East. And Canada has continually called for a ceasefire between Hezbollah and Israel, between Israel and Hamas. We will continue to do everything diplomatically possible to work with allies, to work with like-minded countries, and to express Canadians' concern about this tragedy which is ongoing. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Richmond, Arthabaska. Mr. Speaker, a year ago, the Prime Minister and Premier of Quebec proudly announced a record multi-billion-dollar subsidy for the Swedish company Northvolt. More and more Quebecers and Canadians are now worried by news that the company is in serious difficulty with the loss of over 1,600 jobs, cash flow problems, and the suspension of expansion plans. Can the Prime Minister tell us how much taxpayer money is at stake? Does the federal government have any guarantees to protect us in the event the Montérégie project in Quebec does not go ahead? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister.
For the question, our government is very proud of the anchor generational investments that we've helped to incentivize and bring into the Canadian economy. The Northvolt project is one of many, but it's an important one. I can assure the member that no federal funding has gone out. The minister has made that clear, and that there's flexibility with Northvolt. We know that the Northvolt project is important, and we look forward to the revised plans and working through ensuring that that project continues and contributes to the EV supply chain here in Canada. Thank you.
And that's all the time we have for question period today. We have a point of order for the Honourable Member for Edmonton Strathcona.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, during member statements today, the member for Calgary Heritage used a personal insult towards the leader of the NDP. Mr. Speaker, we're doing this again. Insults and name-calling are clearly against our rules. Yesterday, the Speaker made a ruling to that effect and has called on the Leader of the Opposition to withdraw and to apologize for similar comments. Not only is the Leader of the Opposition ignoring the Speaker and disrespecting the entire House of Commons by doing so, but the lack of meaningful consequences has now given license to other members to follow his lead. I appreciate, Mr. Speaker, that you did bring up a comment after the fact, but the statement was read in full and is made it into the Hansard. This member needs to be asked to withdraw and to apologize.
Thank the Honourable Member, and of course afterwards I didn't catch it, and I guess I'm not perfect. And I did mention that using false titles is not allowed in this chamber, so we'll go back and look at it to see what exactly the words were used, and we'll come back to the House. Anybody else? Okay. Daily routine of business. Tabling of documents. Dépôt de projet de loi émanant du gouvernement.
Introduction of government bills.
Déclaration.
Statements by ministers.
Rapport.
Reports from interparliamentary delegations.
Presenting reports from committees. Introduction of private members' bills. First reading of Senate public bills. Motions. Presenting of petitions. The Honourable Member for Langley Aldergrove.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to present e-petition 4938, which has gathered more than 9,500 signatures from people across the country. And the petitioners call on the House to oppose that portion of Liberal Bill C-65, which would move the election date up to 1 week later.